If you carry a firearm and discharge your weapon in self-defense, you could face hundreds of thousands of dollars in legal fees and expenses. So carry the protection of CCW Safe, Self-Defense Legal Services membership. Upfront payment of all criminal and civil defense costs with no out-of-pocket for members.
Eight Mexican cartels now carry the same federal designation as al-Qaeda. That's not commentary, it's the Federal Register. The organizations on that list fly weaponized drones, run battlefield tactics, and shut down entire border cities inside an afternoon. Tonight, we get into what that designation admits and what it doesn't fix. Picture the truck line at the Laredo crossing frozen in place, engines off. Welcome to Survival Dispatch News for Wednesday, August 5th, 2026. I'm Chris Evans, the CEO of Survival Dispatch, joined by 26-year CIA case officer Jeff M.D. and Delta Team warrior Mike Glover. Bottom line up front, Washington now classifies 8 Mexican cartels as foreign terrorist organizations. Those organizations already field drones, heavy weapons, and insurgent tactics. That fight sits closer to your front door, than any foreign war, and your family's travel patterns are the exposure. Diving directly into segment number 1, what the terrorist designation actually changes on the ground. On July 16th, the Federal Register made it official. The Juarez cartel, the Las Viagras joined the list, and 8 Mexican cartels now carry the same legal designation as al-Qaeda. That designation turns material support into a federal felony, freezes assets on contact, and pushes everyone connected to those organizations onto the FBI terrorist screening database. The groups on that list already run weaponized drones, battlefield tactics, so your government just classified an armed insurgency operating within driving distance of American soil. So going directly to Encyclopedia MD as per usual. Well, actually, you know what? I forgot to go through the points for segment number 1. So let me do that really quickly before I come to you, Jeff. I got a little ahead of myself. See what happens. We take a few days off and then the pattern falls apart. But start with the plain version. When the State Department calls a cartel a terrorist organization, and you know what? I was wrong. What actually changes the next morning, Jeff? I'm completely discombobulated here tonight.
What changes the next morning is not going to be radical and on the surface, but what's going to happen then is the cartels are going to have to be a little bit more cautious about what they do. I mean, they've been doing the same thing forever. So, you know, calling a spade doesn't mean it wasn't a spade before you called it a spade. But what it does then, it gives the government tools that it can use to combat them that's not normally on the table. An example of that are the boats in the Pacific or in the Caribbean coming up that we've been zapping with missiles. It gives you new lethal options in other areas as well. On those situations, those boats are in international waters. They're carrying drugs. We have good reason to believe they're carrying drugs. We know they're carrying drugs. We blow them up. But by designating them a terrorist organization, the option is now available, whether we use it or not, to then do that in Mexico. And the Mexicans will scream and moan unless we coordinate with them and they say, kill this one first, because they have the same problems with them we do. But the problem then becomes you can't give Mexico too much advance notice because it is a narco state and somebody somewhere is going to tell the druggies and they'll make sure that they're not where the bomb goes boom.
Let me ask you, Jeff, before I go to Mike, how significant is it that people are supporting these cartels now in America with money? That becomes a federal felony, material support. How important is that?
It is, but it's a little different from just giving the cartels money, because everybody who buys fentanyl or buys crack cocaine or powder cocaine is technically giving the cartels money. When you buy avocados, for Christ's sakes, you're giving the cartels money, because the cartels control the avocado industry in Mexico. What it's going to be is if you're sending large amounts of money to the cartels. I mean, if you're a distributor of cartel fentanyl in Dallas, Texas, and you take your monthly allotment of cash and you send it back to Mexico, now you're in deep shit, because that is material support of a terrorist organization. It's not the same as buying a dime bag on the street corner, but you are actively engaged in and remitting large amounts of cash to a now declared terrorist organization. It's the difference between buying Iranian pistachios or sending money to the Iranian regime. Different thing.
Okay, appreciate that. So, Mike, I want to hear your thoughts here, like from a tactical resource perspective. So, these 8 cartels that have been added, to the FTO list, there's a couple interesting numbers that I think will kind of drive your answer. 2023 was just crazy at the southern border, right? And there were reportedly 736 watch list encounters in the entire year. So far this year, there have been 12,292 watch list encounters. So that's like 16 times as many, and we're barely halfway through 2026. When you stack on 8 more organizations, what does it do to resources, those tactical resources, boots on the ground, Mike?
Well, I mean, it stretches them into the odds of them not being able to find, fix, or potentially finish any of these guys. I mean, a lot of these resources are allocated, and then when you look at the number of cartels and the number of targets on potential decks, it's insane to think that we would ever do anything unilaterally, because we don't have the resources, which is why there's interagency relationships that have been, sown for decades. There's bases of operation relationships with DOD. 7th Group had relationships built there from my time in service 20 years ago that were training those guys that became cartel across the map. So I would say, one, you have to do bilateral host nation supported operations, because we don't have the independent resources. I just talked to a guy recently who told me, because of what was going on in Iran, actually, this was at the headquarters of Anduril.
Mm-hmm.
I was at their headquarters in California doing a tour.
Cool.
A couple days ago, and ran into the owner, which was really cool. And those guys are on the front line, at the tip of the spear of the priorities, and all of that's in Iran, right? So even resources that are sitting in the U.S. designated for cartels are likely being stretched thin because of other priorities going on. And so I think a lot of it, we're taking our eye off the ball, and we don't have enough resources to combat this.
Well, let me ask you this, Mike. There have been some unconfirmed reports that the reason we haven't been knocking out these narco boats like we were is because we have a stockpile of munitions greatly depleted being allocated for Iran. Interesting you would mention that. Do you see that as being a factor in this?
Yeah, maybe it weighs. I don't think, I think these combatant commanders who are driving the pods, they want those targets, and I can't see anybody denying those potential targets. I think a better or more reasonable answer would be they're realizing that if they put a boat in the water, it's going to get blown up. So
that makes sense.
So they're pulling back in scale, and I do think there are considerations for that, but just not at a tactical level. I can't see them pulling a pod off of a target because they said we don't have enough munitions. There's plenty of other options they could use besides a specific munition that they're scarce in.
All right, gotcha. Jeff, So the Juarez cartel, they murdered 9 Americans in Sonora in 2019. You may recall there was like 3 mothers, and I think it was 6 children. That's 7 years ago. Like, it's a 7-year gap between that massacre and now this designation as an FTO. What does that say as far as how Washington functions or dysfunctions?
Well, every time if you were going to declare a terrorist organization, every time an American got killed in Mexico, it'd be like every day there'd be a new terrorist organization. And one thing in the previous segment, the 736 watch listed encounters, I wouldn't even consider that because that was during the Biden administration. They didn't report anything. So there could have been 50,000 and they would report 736 just to make
Fair.
it look, they're underreporting crime stats as they've been doing it for decades and here and abroad. There's lots of reasons to declare them terrorist organizations. And the ones that amaze me is like when they go and they slaughter, there was one case where they went in a bunch of college students. I think they killed 25 or 30 college students at one time. Okay, if that's not a terrorist organization, what is? When they hang people, from bridges, when they cut their heads off and mail the heads to law enforcement, how is that not a terrorist organization?
Oof.
What we have, because they're trying to achieve, in their case, an economic goal, whether it's economic or political. They're trying to achieve a goal by striking terror in the civilian population. That's a terrorist. That's what terrorists do. That's why they're called terrorists. So why now is I honestly don't know, because they've been terrorists for a long, long time. The phrase narco-terrorism has been around since Pablo Escobar. And granted, he was blowing up airplanes with witnesses on them, but nothing has really changed. I'm hoping this signals a change in our will to do something about it, because it's really hard to call someone a terrorist organization and then do nothing.
Yeah, good point. Mike, back to the tactical side of things here. What do you reckon the first cartel counter move is going to be, and that our team should be preparing against? Are they going to escalate stuff with us? Are they going to, up the ante for corruption? Or are they just going to go quiet and, chill out for a bit while they put a plan together?
It's funny. I don't think I've weighed these courses of action over time and kind of tracked everything that's happening. I don't think they're going to fight at all. I believe it was Sinaloa. Sinaloa, and I might be misspeaking, correct me if I'm wrong, both of you guys, but I think there was the Sinaloa that had 17 members basically defect. And what they did is they basically got amnesty. I wouldn't be surprised if they're being protected.
Wow.
If they're being protected by, government agencies as witnesses, because not only did they defect and get amnesty, but they provided some of the most profound intelligence and information through obviously the IC and several organizations to be able to target networks and infrastructure. Because obviously these cartels, like foreign terrorist organizations overall, cooperate in some means together to be able to thrive. You'll see that kind of partnership in some ways. It's not all like they all try to kill each other. Sure, there's that, but sometimes they cooperate with each other, especially when it comes to logistics or big strategic planning. So I think what you're going to see is a lot of these guys realizing that they're not going to be able to fight the American government, but they're also going to go underground. Look, the trade that happens daily involves, embedding 100 pounds of cocaine in an engine that's crossing the border that 9 out of 10 times gets across, right? So this trafficking of people, drugs, munitions continues to happen every single day. The people component is a very small component of the overall network and its logistics, right? There's a people component to it. That's what we pay attention to. But the logistic supply train, it is going to be the hardest thing to stop. because it requires the most robust planning of operations, and you have to target, you have to go after it, and you have to have likely boots on the ground. And so it's just like that the two likely contractors that were probably ground branch guys that were killed in that vehicle accident, in air quotes, that where their vehicle was found at the bottom of basically the bottom of a cliff burning. It's unlikely that those guys died from a vehicle accident. It's more likely they potentially got IED'd, ambushed, or got into a skirmish. But they were doing a joint operation with local assets and resources to do these things, to destroy the infrastructure. That has to continue. So I think, I don't think there's a chance in hell that you're going to see literal dudes trying to fight. It's more likely that they're going to have to target infrastructure, and they're going to operate the same way they operate every single day. It's going to be standard operating procedures every single day.
Yeah, gotcha. So taking that into account, Jeff, what is this FTO, label? What's the impact on border counties, border cities? That wasn't there before, basically.
I think it frees up different piles of money to be used. And I think Mike is right in that a lot of the big guys won't fight. They'll try to cut a deal, take their money, and retire. I mean, even Pablo Escobar was trying to do that towards the end. But I disagree on they won't fight. It won't be the leaders fighting. When the leaders do their thing and cut a deal and try to go quietly into the good night, that's going to leave a power vacuum. And those guys aren't just going to say, okay, we're all going to vote and Hector's going to be the new head of the cartel. No, they're going to fight for it because that's where the money is. And if you look at drugs from the street all the way to the top, the guys at the bottom don't make a lot of money, but they hold out hope of moving up where they will make money. Well, the head of the cartel is the ultimate. I mean, you look at Escobar, he was burying money in the ground, and where he would count his money by weighing it, because I mean, there was just so much money. He lost millions to rot because he would bury stuff in the ground and get wet and rot. There's so much money to be made there, and there are so many people who look at that as their ultimate career objective. To them, that's like being the starting quarterback on the Super Bowl team, that they will fight for that position. And I think with them being declared foreign terrorist organizations, it also opens up the specter of Guantanamo, and they don't want to go there. So they may fight rather than where they might normally give up and say, okay, and then hope to get out by bribing somebody here, like especially in Mexico itself. I mean, when I can't remember the name of the cartel leader, he was in prison. He was living like it was a life of luxury inside the prison, catered meals, all that. They won't have that in Guantanamo, and they know it. So I think rather than face that, they may fight.
Well, yeah, that's interesting because the Washington Examiner, I think it was Washington Examiner, basically said that Washington, as in the government, is making an assumption that by slapping this FTO designation on the cartels, that it's going to reduce violence, which, I mean, I don't know if that's pie in the sky thinking or not. Mike, give me your take on that. Is there any legitimacy to that? It's going to reduce violence?
I don't think so. I don't. Yeah, it doesn't sound. I mean, that's not what I would think it would do. I think no. The answer would be no.
Too much money in play.
Yeah, there's too much money. Exactly. There's too much. Yeah.
Yeah, good point. I saw that and I read it and I thought to myself, is the Washington Examiner making this up, or do the bureaucrats actually think that that's the case?
Think back at Chicago in the 20s and 30s when you had all these turf wars between gangsters. They weren't fighting because they didn't like each other. They were fighting for turf and money. And when you had a big boss in charge, you had fewer gangs. But when something happened to the boss, when Capone went to prison, or the head of the Purple Gang got busted, that's when you had an uptick in violence as rival gangs are trying to take over the territory of a gang they perceived as currently weakened, or you had two lieutenants inside a hierarchy trying to fight for the boss job, and they had their own factions. That's what gang turf wars are all about. It's not turf, it's the money they make from the turf. So
Yeah.
somebody's always willing to fight for that.
Yeah, that makes a whole lot of sense. Let's get into segment number 2, warning signs a border war sends before it arrives. Every border corridor has a normal posted crossing, weights, staffed inspection lanes, one consulate advisory. And in a slow month, police just park where they always park. In other words, they're sitting ducks. We've discussed this countless times when responding to a calamity is concerned. So deviation is the signal. And tonight's part of me 3 are multi-agency staging that holds for days, inspection lanes going dark with no holiday behind them, and consulate alerts stacking inside a single week. So in other words, watching the same old happen at the border. If that changes, then there's some element of seriousness to this. If that doesn't change, then it's maybe just some more, blowing hot air out of Washington, D.C. You don't need classified access basically to read any of this. The warning signs are easy to see, right? So you see the notice boards when you're crossing the border. You've got the apps that tell you what the wait time is at the border, how long it takes you to drive something that you normally drive for those people across the border on a regular basis. So there's some really easy, tangible things that you can see. Jeff, before we name warning signs, what does normal actually look like at a healthy border crossing on a Tuesday under the current administration?
You're going to have 3 lines. You're going to have foot traffic, normally tourists. I'm thinking Nogales down my closest border crossing. You're going to have vehicle crossing, a lot of times tourists, also people who maybe live in Mexico and have border crossing cars and work in the United States, or people in the United States are on their way down to Puerto Penasco or Guaymas or something like that. They may have a weekend home down there, and a lot of Americans do. And then you're going to have commercial traffic, which are semis, and there's going to be a shit ton of those, and they're carrying products back in both directions, but there's going to be a lot of produce coming up from Mexico. There's going to be copper concentrate from the US going down to Mexico because to maybe feed their smelters or things like it goes back and forth. The mining industry surprisingly does a lot of cross-border trade. And then there's also, raw materials, if there's minerals and, gravel, coal, things like that from here that need to go there, from there need to go here. It goes, goes over either by train, but usually it's commercial, it's trucks. And then you have all the maquiladoras, all these factories that are just on the Mexican side that are making headlamps for Ford and, parts for American manufacturers. They build them in Mexico, put them on a truck, ship them up here to the Toyota plant in San Antonio, and it comes back out as a Tundra pickup. Those are the ones that's everyday stuff. That's routine. If you have a day when there's no truck traffic, something's up.
That makes a lot of sense. Actually, it set Mike up perfectly. Mike, of all the indicators at the border, which one do you think matters the most? Like indicates that we're really truly serious about this. And when you're thinking about that, is there any indicators at the border that you think get I don't know what the right word is, overemphasized when they're really not that important?
Yeah, I mean, I've been tracking some of the content that's coming out of the whether it's Homeland Security or Border Patrol, and kind of their procedures. And what I'll say is there is more emphasis on things like an illegal coming over on a visa, for example, and not allowed to work. I just saw a report where they were denying guys that typically would just get through by putting them or pulling them into secondary and finding out that they were actually coming over for a job, for contract work. Now, that to me, is something that there's a clear letter, but I could see how that would be one of the things that you would blow off when you're prioritizing drugs, human trafficking, etc. But the fact that we're actually doing that, and that there was a policy shift or change whereby they're focused on really the most redundant and likely course of action, guys coming over trying to support their families. When you give just a little leeway there, then all these guys come over and then they illegally stay. They overextend, they overstay, and it causes more issues. So it's good to see that they're actually following the letter of the law and enforcing that. However, with that being said, they're scarce in resources still. They could only stop so many vehicles. I've been across the Tijuana border recently, and there are only a percentage of vehicles that they could stop because they just would not be able to maintain the flow of traffic in and out, which is a huge commerce component to even Americans. There's a lot of Americans who come over the border and feed their families or work over in the Mexican side. So it goes both ways. So I just think there is more emphasis. It's nuances, but those nuances matter. But there's still a lot of stuff getting across the border and not being stopped. I mean, that's just the nature of the logistics supply chain across the borders that happen every single day.
Well, I mean, I don't mean to oversimplify it, but it's kind of like whack-a-mole from my perspective. We come up with something, to counter what the cartels are doing, and they just move in another direction. It's like squeezing Jello in your hand. It squirts out somewhere else, right?
Yeah.
So, Jeff, there's been a ton of weaponized drones used by cartels in Mexico over the past few years. And the stuff I was reading was saying like those drone, let's say missions, for lack of a better term, are moving further and further north towards our border. Give me your thoughts on that, because my understanding is actually, Mike, you can comment on this as well, is that we've actually observed these drones coming across the border and dropping some small payloads and essentially also acting as the coyotes to guide people. I mean, how big of a problem do you see this as being? Jeff first, and then Mike, I'll let you to swing at it after that.
Well, it's a huge potential. And they can watch the news too. They see what's going on in Ukraine and how drones have radically shifted that war. But at the same time, you look at history, okay, we would send bombers to drop bombs on Germany. Well, they'd shoot down our bombers. So what would we do? We would put up fighters. So if they have a drone that is delivering a package of fentanyl, they still want to protect that. So why not send a second drone that's armed, that if someone is about to steal your load that you just dropped, or is going to, some Yahoo sees it and is going to, call the cops, you take out the Yahoo. And you do that with a smaller armed drone, or you use it to distract him. Or if the cops are coming and they're getting near where you've just dropped your stash, another drone comes up, distracts them, leads them away to someplace else. It's a cat and mouse game, and drones are cheap and they're effective, and you don't have to worry about them getting arrested and talking. So yeah, I see expansion of drones coming all over the place for recon, for close air support to protect the drugs that you're bringing in, and for delivering the drugs. Why wouldn't you? One drone drop will pay for 50 drones.
Yeah, so it's interesting you brought up Ukraine. So Mike, our mutual friend Khalid, released some intelligence not too long ago that these cartels have actually been training in Ukraine. I don't know if it's with the Ukrainian government or some other splinter, but give me your thoughts overall on the use of drones on our southern border by cartels.
Yeah, it's a percentage game. If they launch 100 drones and they get 10% of that through, it's likely a win overall based on the scrutiny at the border. And so you can't. I mean, I've been on the border with Mark Lamb, and we've toured the border and talked about his county and the issues that he dealt with. And it's a systemic issue that can't be stopped. I mean, it's just not going to be stopped. And so when you take drone technology and you have 100 drones and you divert the attention of one border guard who's monitoring 100 square miles on the border, and then you weasel your way out to get the drugs in the opposite direction. It's an effective strategy and tactic. It's something that really wasn't utilized 10 years ago, but now is happening every single day. We have technology on the border, drones ourselves, cameras ourselves, but they can only look at one place at one time. And so they can't monitor the entire airspace all at once. And even if they did, there would still be drones that will infiltrate and get their way in. So it's an effective tool for sure.
Yeah, I mean, it's a really interesting problem to solve. That's for sure. And I don't think anybody saw this coming even just a few years ago. Jeff, let's go back to the encounters, the terrorist watch list encounters, and how it's the numbers exploded. Give me your take on what the effect is for people crossing the border, who cross the border on a normal basis. Are they all going to face more scrutiny, or do they actually, do the things that work, like profiling? And what does it look like as far as a hurdle for potentially legitimate commerce that's crossing the border?
Well, it's going to increase. The number of encounters is going to increase because the number of terrorist organizations is increasing. Before, Pablo was affiliated with the, Juarez New Generation or something like that. He was just a narco affiliated guy. And maybe you turned him back. Maybe you searched him, whatever you had to do. Well, now he comes through and he's not just a narco affiliated guy. He's a terrorist affiliated guy. That's going to get a lot more scrutiny. It's going to get logged differently. So the number of encounters is going to go up astronomically just because there are more narco guys on the border than there are what we think of traditional terrorist guys on the border. And so now that you're lumping them all together, the number of encounters is going to go through the freaking roof. How they handle those encounters is going to be determined by what kind of resources they have available and what the policy is. If it's just to turn them back, okay, or maybe you detain them for a couple of days and then kick them out or whatever. But it's going to require resources. I doubt they're going to be trying to put them all in Leavenworth or put them all in, Supermax. We still don't have the resources or the space for them. Those are reserved for the big fish. Now, if they turn out to be a big fish, yeah, but you rarely catch a big fish crossing the border like that. It's usually the little fish that do that, the grunts. So yeah, you're going to see encounters go through the roof just because there's a huge pool of untapped special interest aliens now that can qualify to make the list.
So, Mike, I want to come back to Sheriff Mark Lamb. When you were with him, obviously that was a different time and place under the Biden installation. But just from your eyes on the situation, whether it's then or now, what is the one thing, or maybe there's more, maybe, there's several things you can think of that we should be doing at the border that we're not doing or we haven't done?
The biggest thing is, at the time, which I don't think it's changed much. At the time, like for example, we went on a ride along and we pulled over a vehicle that had two illegals in camo net suits that were being transported by a black female from California. She was getting paid probably, we estimated $2,500 per illegal. So she was making $5,000 to pick them up at a unknown location. Just the general vicinity or area that she picked him up at, and transport them to California for $5,000. When she was rolled up, she was handed over to Border Patrol, and they expected she was going to be released that evening, with potentially no charges at all. What she was doing was a federal felony. I mean, she was trafficking human beings on behalf of a foreign government. We could have stacked charges on her. but her and everybody else, because she was very nonchalant about it, there are no consequences. So there's no consequences for Americans who are trafficking human beings, because they say it's like a cartel problem. No, it's an American problem. You got college students getting paid $5,000 to transport illegal immigrants to a location that they met on a Snapchat group, facilitating the cartel's operations, and there was no consequence. And so I think partially the system is so backlogged with this kind of issue that they're not willing to prosecute, at least from Mark Lamb's perspective. So what do you do when you're broke and you're American and you want to make some money and the cartel is offering you thousands of dollars to like drive somebody, Uber them into California? Well, that's what happens. So I think, one, we got to just follow the letter of the law. Two, we got to address the legal system, because most of the systems are why there's rewards and not consequence for these kind of actions.
Enforce the laws that are on the books. That's a novel concept, isn't it?
Yeah.
Oh my God, no.
Who would have thought of that? Let's get into the third and final segment here. When cartel insurgency starts costing American households. So February proved the mechanism. One leadership strike in Jalisco, and within days, airlines canceled Mexico flights, truckers rerouted, and freight stacked up at Laredo and El Paso. Your produce aisle, your parts counter, and your border state paycheck all ride on bridges that cartel violence closes without asking Washington's permission. The strategic consequence is a standing risk, like a premium on everything that crosses the line. And the households that map their exposure now set their own terms instead of letting a cartel set them. And interesting enough, Mike and Jeff mentioned avocados, which that industry is now controlled by the cartels. And I don't know if you like you like avocados. What's the plan, Jeff? If you like avocados and the border gets shut down like this, what does the avocado lover do, especially the liberal ones in California?
You pay extra for American grown avocados and, from California and Florida. But the price will go up. And, when you talk about the borders getting closed, it's not so much the cartels closing them. It's the U.S. government closing them in response to the cartels. Cartels want them open. They don't make any money if their trucks don't get through. They want all the trucks going through because that gives them more vehicles to hide theirs in. But their violence gets out of hand, and the U.S. government basically says, okay, we're going to shut this down. It's almost a way of punishing the Mexicans because, the Mexican government loses tax revenue and everything else too. But it's the way to punish them for not getting a handle on this crap. And it punishes the cartels for being out of control. If they're, uber violent, then it punishes them as well. But it's going to be a tough thing. Yeah. Are there going to be shortages? Sure. We saw it with tariffs. We put some tariffs on Mexico, and then, traffic and across the border kind of dropped dramatically, and then prices went up. And it affects them as well because, some of their factories require U.S. components to build stuff down there. So it's a tough thing, but the ones who pay are going to be the average Mexican and the average American. They're the ones that are going to see in the short term prices go up, maybe lose a job. If a factory has to close because they can't get parts, critical spare parts or components from a Mexican maquiladora, you got to close that factory in San Antonio. I'm talking about that Toyota Tundra factory. You got to close it. That means all those Americans who work at that Toyota Tundra factory, they're laid off until that can get fixed. And we saw it with the computer chip problem, where a lot of companies had to shut down automobile production because they couldn't get the computer chips that were required.
Yeah.
We're very vulnerable to the global supply chain, and Mexico is probably our single largest trading partner.
Yeah, well, I think a lot of that is China sending stuff into Mexico to get into our market.
Well, yeah, that's true.
that's another conversation. But Mike, take off your tactician's hat for a minute, put on your strategy hat. I read a number of articles where people who are supposed subject matter experts in the border, the cartels, and all these things say that the same pattern has been occurring over and over. So there's some sort of violent act in Mexico, let's say figuratively, happens on a Monday. And then by Friday, we have this knee-jerk reaction where flights are getting canceled. They're holding trucks for a longer period of time. I think they call it dwell time, when they're just sitting there waiting to get processed by customs to come into the country. So that results in all kinds of delays. It doesn't seem like a particularly good strategy to me. I mean, what's your take on that strategy, and what do you think the strategy should actually be?
You mean the strategy for? I don't understand the question. You mean the strategy from the bad guys' perspective?
No, from our side, there's cartel violence in Mexico, and our knee-jerk reaction is that we squeeze things down at the points of entry for lots of commercial traffic, like Jeff alluded to and mentioned happening. And then over time, we loosen our reins on it, and then there's more cartel violence, and we clamp down on it again. It doesn't seem to be a long-term solution, is what I'm getting at. Doesn't seem
I don't know if that's. I don't know the reason why you would do that. Period, because cartel violence happens every single day in Mexico. I mean, the 4,000 people were murdered in Tijuana last year. I mean, it's just a normal occurrence. And so even if there's a major scale violent acts that happen across the border, the economic trade-off would be the reason why you would sustain logistics coming across the border. I mean, I could actually see the justification of why you would not completely shut down the border, because we don't think about exporting and importing goods that happen across the border every single day into our country. And it's not, obviously it could be avocados and pecans, but it could also be, boots and Mexican factories and Ford Motor Company. All of these things are coming across the border constantly. I even have done tour factories in Monterrey, Mexico, because I was going to set up shop and sew soft goods in Mexico because it was more affordable, and I'd prefer to go to Mexico than to China, and I can control the logistics supply chain. I could actually take a truck and go get it myself. So a lot of our commerce depends on it maintaining the integrity of staying open. But anything that you have open, even for short periods of time, the bad guys are going to funnel their stuff in. And so I don't know if I don't even know if that's true. Do they shut down the borders when that happens?
So it's been a regular occurrence for many, many years. There's some notable violence on the Mexico side. We have the knee-jerk reaction. We clamp down on things, and then it over time just kind of goes back to normal. And then there's another one. So let me give you a chance to jump ahead for Ray of Sunshine. Do you think it's just political or security theater and political theater? Because I get the feeling from my perspective that that's what a lot of it is. I
don't know what, like it would be like shutting down air traffic control every single time there was a tip that came in for a potential threat, right? That would be not a good way to operate, right? Because then every single time that there's an issue, they would take advantage of you shutting down the border. I don't know if I've ever seen the border shut down. I don't think it ever shuts down. I mean, I've been across the border many times. I've operated and trained on the border, in Arizona exclusively, because we have a lot of training opportunities there in special operations. And I've never seen the border shut down for extended periods of time, because I think it would cause economic issues more than anything.
Well, I don't think the pattern is a complete shutdown, right? The pattern is constraining the border. So increasing that dwell time that I mentioned, where, loads end up taking days instead of hours to be inspected.
I don't know, Chris, I don't know if that's true. I mean, I track border stuff. I've never heard that before, as far as like squeezing down. There might be slight delays, and you might get like a 12-hour cycle of delays. I just mean, I don't think, like, I don't even know if that would be an effective tool or strategy overall anyway. Like, why having truck drivers or stopping and being more scrutinized at the border, I mean, that would cause more economic issues on our end than anything else, which is why I don't think it's a major strategy push. I've been across the Tijuana border several times in recent history when there's been significant cartel violence on the Tijuana side. And I don't, you have to speak to the actual tactics of what they're specifically doing. Are they shutting it down from 10 lanes to 2 lanes? Is it 12 hours versus 72 hours? All those would not be effective strategies, because if the drugs are sitting in a container for 12 hours versus 24 hours, it's still sitting in the container and still going to get across the border. I don't know if there's more scrutiny per se.
Yeah, well, I think that's the argument, is that they're supposedly scrutinizing things more so and basically plugging the border up as opposed to completely shutting it down. I guess you kind of think of it almost like in a dragnet sense, I guess. Like, Jeff, what are your thoughts on handling this?
What they'll do is, instead of searching every 5th vehicle, they'll search every other vehicle. That will slow everything down.
Yeah.
But it also increases the likelihood that the drugs coming through will get intercepted and cost the cartels a ton of money. Now, the message it sends to Mexico, the government, is you get all these trucks backing up on both sides of the border, and the Mexican government looks at that as, okay, that's money coming into our country, because avocados go out, money comes back in, and it affects them financially, especially if it's produce and things that are perishable. You don't want to have a perishable product sitting on the side of the road in the heat of a Sonoran summer for 5 days when you're expecting them to be in the truck for 5 hours. And so there's a lot of loss and things like that. Most of the time, I think that's political. It's to send a message to the Mexicans to say, get your shit together, get a handle on things.
That actually makes a lot of sense. Mike, do you want to comment on that perspective? Because I can see that being used kind of as a weapon against the Mexicans, say, get your shit together.
Yeah, I could see that happening. I mean, I just saw this recent episode of the Border Patrol stuff, and I love that stuff because all the stuff they pull out every single day, they're creating new techniques. The most recent episode, they were smuggling. They're basically building a drivetrain and the engine from scratch, and then basically cutting half the cylinders out and putting the drugs in the engine.
Wow.
So the engine ran like crap, but basically it was so hard to detect. And these guys got the tip that there was a white van or a white truck, and they ended up finding $100,000 worth of cash that was located in the engine compartment of the actual engine. So they had to crack the head in order to get to the access to that. So yeah, I could see that. Like, I mean, that's all political, but it's like, and Jeff knows this, it's like spy games. There's accepted risk and there's accepted games that you play, and it's a game. I mean, it really is a game, and they know the game. I'm sure there's case officers in Langley who have been playing this game for decades, who know exactly how this works, but it's all a game, because the bottom line is they're going to get drugs and money and people across no matter what percentage and what statistics on a PowerPoint that you're briefing to some official are going to make them happy. The reality is it's just part of the game. I mean, if it's been going on since the beginning of history, by the way. I mean, before it was trucks smuggling drugs that were intercepted by X-ray machines. It was donkeys coming across the border and pioneers, So it's something that's always been done.
And before drugs, it was prohibition. They were smuggling booze.
Yep.
As you're saying donkeys, Mike, I'm thinking Sheriff Mark Lamb saying prison pocket in the context of a donkey. You're saying that.
Yeah. But I mean, I did counter-narcotics stuff in Afghanistan. We were mostly heroin, well, all heroin, some hash, but nobody cared. And most of our tips came from one trafficking organization diming at another.
Wow.
They were basically letting the U.S. government, and or in our case, us and the Brits and the Afghan National Army, to take their competitors' product off the street. So that, and it was better for them,
Yeah.
And the cartels do the same thing. You had a cartel leader who was arrested because somebody gave us the exact location of where he was going to be, and it's either A, his competition, or B, someone within his own command structure who wanted his job. Kill the boss, take over. It's like the king is dead, long live the king. That's old school. And who did that to wonderfully was Joseph Stalin. Anytime a rival popped up, he disappeared because he knew all they have to do, if they kill me, they'll be in charge. Well, if I kill them first, it's just their method of survival.
Yeah, that's interesting. Mike, just backing up for a second. So when you're talking about like money and drugs being hidden in the engine block, I'm thinking to myself, there's countless vehicles out there that are a V8, but if you don't have your toe into it hard, it'll actually turn off cylinders or go back to like a V4. And yeah, it would probably run like shit if you took the pistons and the rods out and all that kind of stuff. But that's getting pretty intricate when you're putting stuff inside of a cylinder. Like,
It's wild. It's wild.
It's absolutely unbelievable. Let me ask you this, Mike. So let's just say border slowdowns, maybe is a better way to put it. Does that affect the people who live on the border first, or does it go directly to the national supply chain? In other words, who in America feels it harder earlier?
I think it's probably national supply chain. I mean, it's a little bit of both, right? A lot of economics are built around the proximity to the border. If you look at Yuma, Arizona, which I went to free fall school, advanced free fall jump master school, like a whole bunch of training. That entire town, which gets more sun than anywhere in the world, is economically feeding Mexico, but also the United States, right? So it's like just the proximity of the border alone, a lot of it is exported for trade with Mexico. And again, like we talk about avocados, I mean, I can go right here in Heber City, Utah, not to National Grocers and pick up an avocado from Mexico. I can also pick up an avocado from California, right? So it's like a lot of the supply chain of things that we don't even think about. I mean, Ford Motor Company and Toyota moved a lot of their factories to Mexico to avoid a lot of the fees that they would get from exporting from overseas or by ship. And then those were the factories that got hit, that they were told, you better move your factories into the United States if you want to be successful. So it happens every single day. And I think it's a global or a national consideration, but also a local one.
When this topic comes up and you say things like that, I think to myself, why in God's green earth did we ever let the globalists move our industries out of the country and elsewhere and make us dependent on other countries when it didn't need to be that way? It never was that way in the past, of course.
That was NAFTA.
Yeah, well, I would say it even started before then, but yes, the U.S. the what was it called? The Auto Pact, I think it was in the 60s.
Yeah,
was the first major project or agreement along those lines. Jeff, let's pivot to the dollars and cents side here. So my understanding is that you designate an organization of FTO, foreign terrorist organization, that gives us the ability to seize money and assets that we wouldn't be able to seize under normal circumstances. One, can you confirm that? And two, how big of a deal is that?
Well, I don't know if it's that big of a deal because we've been seizing narco assets forever. I knew I was dealing with the guys down on the border, just down in Brownsville, Texas, and they were talking about the Mexicans from Matamoros would come across and they would buy a condo in Brownsville, Texas, or maybe they're on the Gulf for money laundering. And it was that we're just buying assets. Well, then we'd find out, the FBI would find out that they were owned by a narco company, and they would seize those assets. And then they would, auction them off, public auction, keep the money. And money would go to the Treasury. Well, you know who bid on them? Other narco guys, because they knew they're not going to catch them all. And in areas like that, especially, you've got families are on both sides of the border. They've been there for 200 years. They got family on the Texas side and they had family on the Mexico side, and they were there before there was a Texas and before there was a Mexico. So they would just get a family member in if someone from Matamoros would find a cousin in Brownsville, and they would ostensibly they'd buy the house, and then they just give the money to their cousin. So that kind of crap has been going on forever, and it is very, very difficult to stop because they're willing to accept a certain amount of losses. It's sort of like when we shoot it in World War II. If you're shooting at a German fighter and you're in a P-51, do you really expect every one of your bullets to hit the other plane? Hell no. If 1 out of 100 hits it, you're doing good. And that's kind of them. There's such a high profit margin on drugs, they can afford to lose a lot. It's the law of large numbers. The more stuff you push across or towards the border, the more is going to get through. You're going to lose a lot, but as long as you're still making net profit, they're going to keep doing it.
Yeah. So, Mike, let's try and stitch this together into something that actually makes sense for the average American family. And I think, the phrase of this episode, supply chain, right? So our supply chains are vulnerable for multiple different industries, whether it's food or other stuff. Switch into the prepper mindset, Mike. What should people be doing on a regular basis from a prepping perspective if they're not already doing it?
I think I look at it as percentages. Like if I'm looking at how much you depend on outside resources in order to be reliant. For example, food. How much of the percentage of your food, like protein, do you outsource? Do you buy all your chicken, beef, and pork from a grocery store? Start by percentage insourcing some of that and being more self-reliant. A great example would be fishing. A lot of people think fishing is just fishing. You go to the pond, you go to the lake, you pull out a bass, you put the bass back in, this catch and release. You can go anywhere in the country on the coast and get a chartered fishing trip and bring back 100 pounds of fish. And that fish could feed your family for a year. Breaking down the percentage of proteins, like fish, beef, chicken, pork. If you're just taking back that certain percentage, but it's something that you've caught yourself, you've been through this experience, you're insourcing your reliance. And by percentage, you're cutting the umbilical cord from this dependency on a lot of institutions, a lot of supply chains that aren't very consistent, reliable, or repeatable. And so I think learning to hunt, learning to fish, learning to can, to jar, learning to grow food, that's a good place to start. But if you really expand this thinking, you could look at the way your house or home is powered. You can look at the water that's connected to your home. You can look at some potential off-grid options. Hell, you could look at spending some time in an RV displaced from your home, which is practice for displacement for this, a potential bug out situation. Me and the wife just packed out our RV because we had a red flag warning 2 days ago with the kids, and 30-mile-an-hour winds, all the recipes for disaster for if a wildfire was on the hillside or on the mountainside, it could potentially sweep over this entire town, similar to what happened in Maui or Palisades. I don't take risk. So I loaded out the RV, got it packed, backed up the vehicle and said, hey, look, if we have to displace, we got 4 routes out of this town. One of those routes is going to be jam-packed and likely because of the fire. If there is a fire that populates anywhere, we're breaking contact. We're getting in the RV and we're heading in a specific direction opposite of the fire, but I want it to be pre-packed just in case. Did the fire happen? No, but we had fun loading it out. The kids were in there playing around. Start thinking like that, because that's the best way to practice insourcing your reliability, is by looking at recreation, whereby you need to self-sustain yourself off-grid or, in the national forest or national park. It's the same requirements that you would need in this kind of catastrophe scenario.
Yeah, that's awesome stuff. I would expect nothing less from Mike Glover, to be quite frank.
The wife was not happy at doing that, by the way.
And
I'm not going to venture into that ground.
I might have said you married a man who wrote a book on this, and I'm not just going to be the guy who wrote the book on it. We actually have to live this in practice.
Well, I like Jess, and I don't want to be on her bad side, so I'm not making any comments. I'm just going straight to Jeff on this one. So, Jeff, I mean, clearly that's like awesome preparedness on Mike's part. What do the people do who are living paycheck to paycheck?
Yeah, it's tougher for them, but rather than build up a big reserve, you look at the things that, like Mike said, that you have to outsource, and you try to buy a little bit more of each so that you have a buffer. So it's like a slinky. If the supply chain starts to get thin, you've got enough of a spring behind it that you can fill in a little bit. It's not going to last forever, but it's just to keep the, it's like, okay, toilet paper goes to $10 a roll. Do you have enough in your pantry that, you don't really have to worry about it for a little while, so you can wait for either the price to normalize or you find a different supply. It's not a permanent solution. It's a stopgap, but it gives you the flexibility. And so you start looking at what you really need. This is the needs, not the wannas, and say, okay, I really need more of this. I really need more of that. I really need more of this. And again, as you're not buying a 6-month supply of it because you don't have the money for that. You may be just another couple extra weeks here, another week or two there. Maybe stock up on things that are high calorie, low cost, pasta. And it sounds weird, but mac and cheese is a, you get a box, it sits on, you can put it on the shelf for a long time. I mean, as long as you've got basically a little bit of milk, and you can get powdered milk or some sort of a fat, a margarine or something like that, you've got mac and cheese. And that's a meal that's flavorful and it's filling and it's got calcium and it's got all this other stuff in it. And is it something you want to live on your whole life? No. But is it a really good stopgap that if something happens, you can feed your family? And yeah. So I would look at low cost solutions in narrow areas and don't worry about we got to have extra ice cream in the freezer. No, you don't. You don't need extra cookies in the pantry. You don't need extra ice cream in the freezer. And you don't need another standing rib roast either, because, that costs $100. No, you want cost effective that's going to give you calories. It's going to give you vitamins and minerals. It's going to give you protein. It's going to give you what you need.
Well, I think my wife uses the macaroni and cheese as kind of like a bait and switch deal, because once in a blue moon, she'll buy some boxes of macaroni and cheese. And then every time I go to cook it, she'll go, oh, look at my little 5th grader making himself his macaroni and cheese for lunch.
Hey, I bought my grandkids and I said, man, let's do some mac and cheese. And if it's not in a crisis situation, you throw in a little shredded cheddar on top and you use butter instead of margarine. That's just good, man.
What? Okay, so
mac and cheese.
So, I mean, nobody gets ray of sunshine today because there hasn't been any doom and gloom on the regular level. But I am going to award the Wasatch Wagyu, let's say, Pig of the Day award.
MVP.
MVP, that works as well.
Most valuable pig.
How many Wasatch Wagyu have you had today, Mike?
I had a couple last night at 2 a.m, trying to kill a coyote in my yard. It supplied the energy I needed to get on the gun.
Well, of course it did. You can't run a V8 on a gallon of gas, right? So, Jeff, how many of you had?
3.
He's the Wasatch Wagyu winner of the day. I do got to mention. Do you have one of these hats, Mike?
I do. I have one. Yeah,
they're pretty cool. And Jeff, did Greg send you one of these as well?
No, I haven't got
one. Yeah, you don't get one of those, Jeff. You have to earn that.
Well,
how many do I have to eat to earn it?
Well, hold on a second here. So for the next 72 hours, if you go to wasatchwagyu.com and you buy over $100 of jerky. Don't forget to use discount code SD20 to get 20% off. Greg's going to send you one of these kick-ass hats.
Nice.
So, and right now it's an insider only club, Jeff. So that's why you're not in it.
So you don't just get it for eating the turkey. You don't.
If that was the case, we would all have like boxes of hats.
And you'd have a full bodysuit and walk out.
Right? Oh my God, that's too funny. Hey, Mike, I know you've been traveling a bit and stuff, but the guys from Carnival said to me that they're like this close on Amazon to being put in a new category. And Dean sent you a shirt and stuff, right? Like the nice.
He sent me a vest
shirts.
and a hat. Yep.
Yeah. So, and I think they sent us t-shirts, I don't know, 6 months ago or something like that. And I asked Dean, and he said they still have the same t-shirts. They're really expensive. They're like 20 some odd dollars wholesale with the Carnival logo. For anybody watching, if you go to Amazon, do a search on Carnival freeze dried meat. Doesn't matter what product you buy, doesn't matter what the price is. Leave a 5-star review, send a screenshot of that and your receipt to sales@carnival.com, and they're going to send you a really cool t-shirt. Randy's got one usually hanging behind them. They're super high quality shirts. So it's a pretty good deal. Not a whole lot to it, but other than that, guys, appreciate your time as usual. I screwed up on Friday night. I was at the cabin. I was working crazy hours, and I said, enjoy the closing video, and I hit end, and the whole thing just went, that was it. So I made sure that I fixed it in the studio today, but we'll continue the American Under Siege series tomorrow evening, usual time, 7 p.m. And then on Friday, by the way, we've got a special guest joining us, Nessa from nessashemp.com. Her family's from Lithuania. They lived through communism. She grew up under communism. And Jeff and I on Friday will be having a discussion with her in this unholy alliance between the jihadis and communist socialists. And Nessa's going to give us some firsthand examples of just how terrible it is living under communism for those people who maybe need a refresher. But Mike, appreciate your time. Jeff, appreciate your time and insight as usual. God bless our law enforcement officers. God bless our troops. God bless America. And I promise, enjoy the closing video. Godspeed, y'all.